No, you're a straw man in my view.
I mean, okay, sorry. I don't know what this is going to sound slightly mean, but I don't think, like, I think your objection relied on a bit of a misunderstanding of how SIA worked.
Okay, well, I think it's just better we just free flow this a bit. So I'm here with Matthew Aldeinstein, correct me if my pronunciation is wrong, also known as Bentham Bulldog on Substack. And I'm a big fan of his articles and of his YouTube channel. And I wanted to ask Matthew a couple of questions. So we're going to be talking about...
Just before the questions, I just want to say, thanks for the generous intro. I've also been a big fan of your blog and your YouTube channel. I think both are very good. So I appreciate you having me on.
Oh, thank you, Matthew. So I wanted to chat with Matthew just personally, really, but we're going to be talking about the anthropic principle at a certain moment in this discussion. I don't want to start with that, though, because I don't want to start with a debate. I'm going to ooze into it. Maybe that's not the right word, but we're going to move into it. First, I just wanted to chat a bit and just ask some things I was curious about regarding your Substack. So just for the audience sake, maybe even if they want to consult one article of yours, what would you say was like your best article?
I don't know. It's hard to know what my best article is. I mean, I guess if you look at what the Substack numbers say, the one that had the most likes is an article. I think it's called something like "Trump Attempted a Coup." So that was my most popular article. Another, I think the one that is best maybe was, I had one called "The Best Charity Isn't What You'd Think." The case I make in that charity, in that article, is a little bit counterintuitive, but I make the case that one of the best places you can give your money is to a place called the Shrimp Welfare Project. What the Shrimp Welfare Project does is it spends money on stunners that are used to stun shrimp before they're slaughtered. And the stunners are really cheap, and they stun a lot of shrimp. So it's like $10,000 to stun like 100 million shrimp per year. What this works out to is that like every dollar that's spent on these stunners prevents about, around the marginal dollar prevents around 20,000 shrimp from dying a painful death. So, I get through the evidence that shrimp probably feel pain. And, if they feel pain and you can prevent 20,000 of them from dying painfully, instead giving them painless deaths for just $1, that's a really good use of money. And so I make the case for that in that article. And that article convinced people to give thousands of dollars to the Shrimp Welfare Project.
Lovely. And what would you say is your most underrated article instead? Sometimes you write something and then you'd be like, why didn't this get more likes? Why didn't this video get more views?
That's a good question. I would have to look back carefully in order to come to a confident judgment about this. But I mean, I guess one that I wrote recently was, I wrote a recent fairly detailed post about the anthropic argument called something like all the questions about the anthropic argument answered or something. I forget exactly what I titled it. Let me see. I titled it The Ultimate Guide to the Anthropic Argument. And I think, this was much better than most of my articles. I spent a lot of time editing it and trying to make everything clear. And it was very detailed. And this one people didn't seem to like very much. I think, one unfortunate thing is if you want to go into a lot of detail, you have to write long articles. And when articles get really long, then people start getting bored. So this article ended up being about 13,000 words, which is probably part of the reason why lots of people were not a huge fan of it. And many of the people seem to leave comments without reading the whole thing, which is reasonable if the article is 13,000 words.
Okay, so this is the article I'm going to debunk shortly. Just kidding, of course. But I'm going to bring my objections, let's say. So one thing that I was interested in hearing your opinion about, because you study philosophy. On my channel, I've been unfortunately No, unfortunately or fortunately, I don't know. I raised some criticisms surrounding continental philosophy, and I know that often in the analytic camp, and would you say you're an analytic philosopher, Matthew?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if I count as a philosopher. I'm just an undergraduate who writes about philosophy.
Well, you published. Haven't you published like a couple of works on philosophical journals?
Yeah. I have 3 papers that I've published. So maybe this makes me a philosopher. I don't know, but certainly the kind of philosophy that I'm interested in and that I write about and so on is analytic philosophy, not continental philosophy.
And are you another one of those analytic types who thinks that continental philosophy is to be disregarded, essentially?
Yes, I think so. I mean, there might be a few. It might be that if you read the continental philosophers very carefully, occasionally you can draw insights out of them. But this is true of almost everyone. Okay, if you read almost no matter who you read, you can, if you look really hard, you can draw some insights out of them. But then what distinguishes analytic philosophy from continental philosophy are just things that make analytic philosophy strictly better than continental philosophy. So the analytic philosophers, unlike the continental philosophers, write clearly. This is in fact a plus. If you write clearly, that is an improvement in your writing. If you write in sort of obscure jargon that somehow passes for good writing in academia, but then no one would consider good writing anywhere outside of academia, it makes it completely impossible to understand what you're saying or to identify what the argument that you're making is with any degree of precision. This is not an improvement. And so they write poorly, and then the arguments that they're making are often bizarre and unclear. Often you can't even identify how many premises there are or what the premises are supposed to be. You can get a vague sort of feel of what the argument is, but it's nothing precise. And I mean, then continental philosophy also seems to have these sort of weird political prejudices where, for example, calling something neoliberal seems to be sufficient to discredit it. I mean, it's just everything that makes analytic philosophy really good is completely absent, if not warped and perverted in continental philosophy. Now, one thing that you've highlighted on your channel is there was the SoCal hoax, where Alan SoCal wrote this complete bullshit paper and sent it to a high-ranking journal that publishes in continental philosophy, and he got it published. And then Pluckrose, Lindsay, and Boghossian repeated the same experiment with these critical theory journals, and they also got many of their. I mean, they submitted different papers, but they got some of their papers published. So what you have is many of the top analytic philosophers. I think Timothy Williamson's made this point. Noam Chomsky's made this point. People who, if anything, you'd expect them to have political prejudices that favor the continental philosophers. You have many of these people saying that they tried to engage with the continental philosophers and basically concluded that the continental philosophers were full of shit. Then you have the fact that when you just read them, it's almost impossible to understand what they're saying. And then you combine this with the fact that there have been experiments where it would be too quick to say the experiments have definitively established that continental philosophy has no standards, but it's reasonable to say that it provides evidence that it has no standards. Certainly, the probability of SoCal's paper getting published and of the other papers by Lindsay, Pluckrose, and Boghossian getting published, if continental philosophy were a serious subject, the odds are much lower that they would have gotten published. So those are my thoughts on continental philosophy. I tend not to be.
Interesting. Yeah, I see. So I usually separate the two hoaxes because I'm not sure I would put continental philosophy together in the same basket as critical theory. In the sense that, in my view, the problem, if you want to call it like this, of critical theory, I see it more as a fact that if the stated goal of the discipline is to always critique power, then I think you're going to end up in some perverse incentives to make weird arguments, because how the academic structure is set up, that you have to publish, and if the goal of your discipline is to critique power, I think there's a kind of an incentive to degenerate into into arguments that are not very good in the critiquing power realm. But I'm not sure there is the same ambiguity in a critical theory that there is in continental philosophy. Although I don't trust my judgment that much. What would you say?
So I agree with your criticism of critical theory. I think that it does encourage people to make extremely poor criticisms of existing power structures because basically there's just this extreme negativity bias in the field where if you say something is good, then you're not taken very seriously. But if you say that things are bad in hidden and subtle ways, the more hidden and subtle the ways are that existing structures are bad, the more credit you get. And so this often leads to fairly low standards for publishing criticisms of the existing institutions in the West. Now, but I do also think that critical theory does just have the same problem as continental philosophy, where there's sort of very verbose jargon. It's very hard to understand what's being said a lot of the time, where there's a tendency to have critical theory writing be the opposite of good writing. So good writing is sort of clear and specific. Critical theory writing talks about, it talks about structures and terms. Talks at a very high level of abstraction, such that it's very hard to pin down often in concrete terms what precisely is being said. I guess in order to resolve this dispute, I guess we'd have to just, crack open some critical theory journals and see how clear they tend to be. I think I've somewhere written articles going through some critical theory journal articles and talking about how basically I think you get similar worries to you getting in continental philosophy. I also think that the Pluckrose, Boghossian, and why am I blanking on the third? Lindsay. Their votes was for critical theory journals. And I think, their papers were both poorly written and unclear and complete bullshit. And several of them got published. So this is a little alarming, at the very least.
Yeah. So you're very opinionated on this, actually. I think I'm quite opinionated too, but I'm not sure. I always struggle to understand because it's very hard to gauge like an entire field. And I do think there is a role in society for academia to critique power structures. Like if I think of an institution that in society could do perhaps a good job at critiquing power structures, well, maybe academia is a good place for these kinds of discussions to happen because it's kind of removed from big institutions, apart from itself, of course. And so there is a sense in which I don't think like critical theory should be completely demolished as a discipline. And it's hard for me to gauge how much the field is unclear in what they're saying, because it's hard to get a measure of these things. Do you think critical theory should be completely demolished?
I don't know. I definitely think there should be less of it. Whether it should be completely demolished, probably there are some bits of it that are fine, and that are, in every field you'll find some people doing important work. I definitely think there's a role for criticizing the institutions of society, but you don't have to be a critical theorist in order to do this. Humer, for instance, who is about the furthest thing from a critical theorist, has written a book criticizing meat eating. This is something that nearly everyone does multiple times per day, and yet his book doesn't qualify as critical theory. It's not like every time you criticize something that lots of people do or some institution that counts as critical theory. You'll find lots of people doing this in philosophy journals, in law journals, in economics journals. Now, of course, sometimes these journals publish critical theory, but you'll find lots of examples of this that are not critical theory. I think what distinguishes critical theory is there's a greater focus on sort of abstraction. There's a great it tends to be sort of more in the direction of postmodernism in terms of both the writing style and the the kind of, nominalization where they'll talk about things in terms of, broad categories of structures rather than having highly specific, concrete criticisms of institutions. So like if you read a critical theory journal, if you read an analytic philosophy journal talking about the wrongness of meat eating, it'll say like, meat eating's wrong, it causes lots of pain and suffering for the sake of small benefits, and argue that this is something that a person shouldn't do. If you read a critical theory journal, it'll be like, the neoliberal apparatus has been structured to disenfranchise black and brown bodies. And then, 10 citations, like just everything that makes writing bad and pretentious is just, filled to the critical theory journal.
No, perhaps I shouldn't laugh. Okay. I don't know. I'm afraid sometimes when I put my public views on YouTube that I'm too, I have been making some critical videos of postmodernism, but I've read some articles by postmodernists that I thought were clear. And I think Michael Humer in his discussion even said that he could understand, I don't know who it was, Sartre. So he could understand some continental philosophers in what they were trying to say. But I do agree it would be better. I don't see any reason to be vague and obtuse. Not obtuse, but to write things in an abstract manner that you can't understand. And regarding neoliberalism, well, you can critique neoliberalism. Yeah, but it is sometimes wielded as this degenerate Mephistopheles satanic doctrine in a way in some disciplines. I don't know where I'm going here.
Yeah.
Just another thing I wanted to say is, yeah.
So a while ago, I had an article that I wrote about criticizing critical theory, and I found some examples of kind of randomly selected critical theory journal articles that were, highly regarded and well published. So like, let's take one example. Okay, here's in a paper called "Decolonization is Not a Metaphor," which I did high school debate and people loved citing this paper. Okay, here's a paragraph from it. An ethics of incommensurability, which guides moves that unsettle innocence, stands in contrast to aims of reconciliation, which motivate settler moves to innocence. Reconciliation is about rescuing settler normalcy, about rescuing a settler future. Reconciliation is concerned with questions of what will decolonization look like, what will happen after abolition, what will be the consequences of decolonization for the settler. Incommensurability acknowledges that these questions need not and perhaps cannot be answered in order for decolonization to exist as a framework. We want to say first that decolonization is not obliged to answer these questions. Decolonization is not accountable to settlers or to settler futurity. Decolonization is accountable to indigenous sovereignty, to futurity. Still, we acknowledge the questions of those wary participants in Occupy Oakland, The answers are not fully in view and can't be as long as decolonization remains punctuated by metaphor. The answer will not emerge from friendly understanding and indeed require a dangerous understanding of uncommonality that uncoalesces coalition politics, moves that may feel very unfair. Like, it's just so pretentious. Like, what they could have said is, we're in favor of decolonizing countries that were built through colonialism. We don't know exactly what will come after, but we don't think we need to, because colonialism is so bad that ending it should be priority, the first priority. And then, we can focus on the other stuff. Like, I mean, it's just, there's all this talk about, all this unnecessary talk where they, refer to, give like a fancy name to things, and then talk abstractly about guiding moves that unsettle innocence. Like, I mean, it's just everything you don't want in writing is just present there.
Yeah. So you can be anti-colonialist without having to be so vague about it or so so weird about it. You can just say, look, we think colonialism is bad, and we don't know exactly how to define it, but we'll be precise when we get there or stuff like that. But I was wondering, like recently I was wondering something. I think I wonder this stuff also because I'm not a philosopher. I'm a professional, I'm a researcher in statistics. So opining on fields that I don't feel are my own there's a part of me that doesn't really want to be too critical, or just I just give my critiques, but hopefully in a way that is not mean and not meant to be mean, not meant to be misconstrued in that way. But anyway, the point I was trying to make is that, have you heard the principle that 90% of everything is bullshit? Like,
I think it's Brandolini's law.
I don't know who first.
I think.
No, Brandolini's law is a fact that if you're trying to fight misinformation, it takes a magnitude more power to fight bullshit than, that's Brandolini's law. But just for the audience, it's that to fight a lie, it takes like 10 times more energy than to create a lie. To fight bullshit, it takes 10 times more energy to fight bullshit.
Yeah, I think, okay.
And unfortunately,
Sturgeon's law, that's what it's called.
Sturgeon's law, then. Yeah, so it's, and I think it's something to have to do with the power law in statistics, and the fact that in every field, it's only the top percentage of people who do the best work. Like in tennis, it's Novak Djokovic, Federer, these guys who do the best work, who are creating the best stuff. In mathematics, I don't know, it's Terence Tao. And so when you look at a field, you should expect 90% of that field to basically be not good. What is it? Is the law bullshit? Does it say bullshit? Whatever. And so when I look at even my field, I realized that because of the incentives that researchers are under, and I think about myself too, it's not like all my work I'm like extremely proud of. Like I have this feeling that every field has big problems with the published work because of the incentives that academics are under to publish. Basically.
Yeah, I think that's right. And certainly, certainly every field is going to have some significant defects in that regard, where not everything coming out of every field is going to be a winner. What distinguishes continental philosophy is, first of all, it's not just that not everything that comes out of it is bullshit, is not bullshit. It's that almost nothing that comes out of it seems to have like clearly communicable insight. Maybe there are some insights that lie somewhere, but there are all the sorts of things that need to be very carefully teased out because you can't understand what the hell it's saying. So you have to read it, 10 times and, track, Google, every third word, because these are like highly obscure languages, often where the author is being intentionally unclear in order to make a point. I think Derrida did this, for example. The other point is that with the median, say, analytic philosophy paper, sure, the median analytic philosophy paper is not going to be like, have revolutionary world implications. But it'll at least be like, well argued. There will be an argument there. It'll be the sort of thing where you consider it and you can see what the author was thinking. You can sort of think through the argument. Maybe you could write a coherent rebuttal to it. The median analytic philosophy paper, I think, it's not going to be groundbreaking, but it'll be at least thoughtful, reasonable, well argued. In contrast, I think the median piece of continental philosophy will just be completely unintelligible gibberish that serves merely to use fancy language in order to reinforce left-wing prejudices. And I don't think it's productive. We have a field who's basically solely devoted to using fancy jargon to repeat far left platitudes in fancy ways. And not everyone who's far left does this. Noam Chomsky, for instance, is a paragon of clear thinking. You can disagree with him, but he gives clear arguments. You understand what he's arguing in every case. He has he'll have footnotes. Like, I think Chomsky is a paragon of how people who are far left ought to argue, where they ought to reason clearly and systematically. But I think it's unfortunate that many of them resort to this sort of continental philosophy bullshit that ends up being wildly unproductive and does not advance our understanding of anything.
Okay. So just not to turn this into a circle jerk, no, I follow some people in the analytic philosophy tradition, I would say. Some people like Lance Bush, and you might know about, who are very critical of analytic philosophy. And recently, you talked with Dan Williams, who is an academic working. I think he might be a professor working in some place in the UK. Correct me, Matthew, if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
And there's this critical movement in analytic philosophy against analytic philosophy. Could you expand a bit on what Dan William was, how your conversation went, and what was his point regarding this?
So it was a very nice conversation. I think Dan Williams is a very smart and reasonable guy. That said, I think he's dead wrong about this. So his basic point was he doesn't think that the methods of analytic philosophy are particularly useful for figuring out the truth. He thinks that we've made a lot more progress in, say, the scientific fields than we have in philosophy. He thinks that philosophers spend lots of their time puzzling over these kind of meaningless questions. And he thinks that we wouldn't expect there to be very much correlation between the kinds of things that we think from the armchair a priori are likely to be true and things that actually end up being true. So there's no reason to think that what Timothy Williamson thinks is true in a metaphysics seminar bears any correlation to what actually is true. Now, I disagree on all the counts. The thing I'm most sympathetic to is, yes, analytic philosophers spend lots of time on unimportant questions, and I think they should spend time on more important questions. But I think this is true of nearly every field. Nearly every field has lots of people writing about things that don't matter at all. Analytic philosophers do spend a lot of time on lots of very important questions. So the effective altruism movement came out of analytic philosophy. Much of the animal rights movement was kickstarted by analytic philosophy. Depending on when you think analytic philosophy began, the forerunners to analytic philosophy were some of the thinkers behind democracy. Their reasoning about set theory was behind the development of the computer, for example. So I think if you look at a track record of analytic philosophy, it's been pretty good. The median bit of analytic philosophy isn't super valuable, but this is true in every field. Nearly every field has this power log distribution where a few contributions have really positive impact. So, for example, I think a guy like Peter Singer has had a hugely positive impact by applying the methods of analytic philosophy to various hugely important questions. Now, Dan wanted to say, well, Peter Singer isn't really doing analytic philosophy, which is, he's in an, well, I guess now he's retired, but he's in an analytic philosophy department, and he's thinking rigorously about ethics and writing about ethics in this sort of clear and rigorous way distinctive of analytic philosophers. It just seems to be kind of no true Scotsmaning to say, well, if the people are writing about ethics, that's not real analytic philosophy. Okay, so that's where I would disagree with that criticism. Regarding the criticism about why would we expect the things that we puzzle over from the armchair to correlate with with what's true of the world. I mean, first of all, we accept that it correlates with what's true of the world in lots and lots of circumstances. So there are an infinite number of theories that you can come up with that would fit all the experimental data. The theory that the world is 5 minutes old and was created with us all having false memories, that explains your present experiences just as well as the theory that the universe is old. Nonetheless, we're all really confident that that theory is false, and I think for good reason. Namely, that theory has a low prior. But if you don't think that our minds have any ability to grasp what states of the world are more likely, then you think we have no basis for making an inference like that. So I think the kind of inference where we, by reflecting in our own mind, make judgments about which states of the world are more versus less likely. This is completely indispensable to having any judgments about what the world is like in any respect, and basically not being completely schizophrenic, having any sense of what the world is ultimately like.
It's interesting, Matthew, that you. Sorry, I'll let you finish.
No, go ahead.
No, it's interesting that you bring up this example, because in my head, how I think about that is, I don't know, is it rude to say that maybe I'm too much of a STEM lord, but to me it's like an uninteresting question in the sense that it's an undecidable question. As I would say, some mathematical proofs are undecidable. Like I would just simply do away with that question by saying, look, we can't know if the universe was created 2 seconds ago and now I've got all these implanted memories in my head. And it's simply an undecidable fact, and that makes it quite kind of uninteresting and not something I want to really dwell on that much.
So I don't think that it is undecidable. I think that the world is more than 2 seconds old. And I think this is something that we can know. Now, it's true that if it turns out the world is 2 seconds old, then like that won't have super important implications for how we ought to live our lives. But nonetheless, my point isn't about how important the question is. My point is about whether we can know the answer to the question. So like, I mean, if you don't think we can know that the world is more than 2 seconds old, then, I mean, one consequence of this is you don't think we can rule out young Earth creationism, which I think is a little... If your view of epistemology ends up saying that we can't be confident that young Earth creationism is false, something has gone badly wrong. Yeah, I guess I don't see what the problem is with thinking that...
No, but I would rule out young Earth creationism by appealing to evidence like the fossil record or stuff like that in my frame of reference. Like, even if the world was 2 seconds, like everything I had imagined, I also have, I also have an epistemology in how I decide if things are true or not. And that epistemology is very scientist-based in the sense that if there's evidence for it, then I discredit a hypothesis. I mean, if there isn't evidence for it, I discredit the hypothesis. If there is, I raise my evidence. And since in this 2 second world that's been created, I have all these memories of there being, of seeing fossils or stuff like that. And
well,
I then...
My point was that if you don't think that we can know that the world wasn't made 2 seconds ago looking older, then it's not clear how you would rule out the universe being 6,000 years old, but having been made to look older, right? So one of the things that sometimes young Earth creationists say is they say, the reason, yes, there are fossils because the world was made looking old when it's only 6,000 years old. I think if your view can't establish that that's false, then something has gone badly wrong. I also think that if you want to think that we can trust induction, we can have any reasonable inferences about the future, that we can be confident that the sun will rise tomorrow, you have to think that we can trust our intuitions about what future states of the world are likelier than what other future states of the world. There are an infinite number of fully consistent ways the world could be, where that would involve all of our past experiences and then the laws of nature dramatically changing 1 second from now. Now, I assign these low probability because I think they're more complicated. They don't seem likely. But if you don't trust seemings, then it's completely unclear how you have any justification for induction. And if you have no justification for induction, then you should think almost certainly the world will chaotically break down 1 second from now. Then it seems like if you think that, you need a really strong argument for it. It's very important.
So, by the way, I don't want to have this argument with you because I think like my philosophical ideas are kind of naive or maybe confused. I have very fringe philosophical ideas. So I would love to have another conversation with you where you educate me on how you think I should think about these things. What I would just say in what you were saying is that I do operate as if everything you said is true. Like I do operate as if I don't think the world was created 2 seconds ago. I believe in induction. I believe in all these things, but I assign more pragmatic reasons for my beliefs. Like I think in part I'm biologically constructed to find some seemings more true or more true than others, and so. And so I do find those seemings more true. So this is, I think it gets to one of the confusions I have with some parts of analytic philosophy, is that when you say it's intuitive to me, or it seems to me, or I assign a higher prior to things, I tend to agree with you, but I don't think that is reflective of some deep underlying truth of the matter. I think it's just a pragmatic truth that is very important. I'm not discounting it. It's extremely important, but it's not like this capital T truth. I don't know if does it make sense what I'm saying, Matthew? I'm sorry if I'm not using technical language.
I mean, I guess I don't quite. It's a bit hard to see what the difference is between a capital T truth and a lowercase t truth. I take a truth to just be something that is the case. Now, right, so you might think like, okay, the reason why we trust that induction will work and that the Earth is old is for pragmatic reasons. But I don't think you can give applause. I mean, first of all, this might be a reason to act as if we trust them, but it doesn't give us a reason to genuinely think that they're right. Right. So, for example, imagine that if I believed that 2 + 2 equaled 3, I would get eternal reward. I would have a very strong pragmatic reason to believe that 2 + 2 equaled 3, but that wouldn't give me a justification for thinking that 2 + 2 equaled 3 in the epistemic sense. It would still, I still shouldn't, it still wouldn't be reasonable to think it's likely that 2 + 2 equals 3. It's just a reason why it would be fortunate if you think it's likely. So, so maybe these pragmatic justifications give us reason to act as if we can trust in deduction and so on, but they won't give us a reason to actually think they're likely. And so if you think we can actually know that, for example, the Earth is more than 5 seconds old with high confidence, I'm not saying we're certain, I'm just saying we're very confident. If you think we can know that, then I think you should think that that we can trust our intuitions about these subjects. It's also it's also not clear.
Yeah,
like
no,
if you're the other point.
I think.
All right, sorry.
Go.
Sorry, I think there's a slight delay, so I think that's why where there's some of the cutting in and out.
Yeah, there is. No. In fact, I do trust my intuitions, but I don't. And I think we should define truth as you're using it. So, in a sense, I agree with everything you say. I think we should define truth that way, but I see it more as for pragmatic reasons. And because I think we have a natural inclination that is given by our biological similarity to value certain intuitions more. And at the end of the day, I don't know if there's a big disagreement here. I think maybe there's a disagreement in form on what I'm saying, because I think we should treat truth as you're saying. But as I said before, I don't want to get in a discussion with you on this because, first of all, I'm unprepared. And second of all, there was other more important things other things I wanted to reach. But if you want to have a last word on this, I'll leave you the last word.
No, I think, or I guess I'll just say one last thing, which is that I think if you think that the only reason we should trust our intuitions is pragmatic, first of all, it's hard to see why you would think that. If you don't, it's hard to see what could justify that judgment without relying on intuitions. And then it's also hard to see how you would think, on what basis you would think that it's pragmatically useful to trust various of our intuitions if you don't think we can know the things about the world on non-pragmatic grounds. So like if it can't be that the only reason to trust induction is pragmatic, because it's only beneficial to follow induction if you think induction is likely to hold, right? If induction it is no likelier to hold than non-induction, then it doesn't matter what you do at all. So I don't think it can be given a purely pragmatic justification. But
okay, you gave me a strong instinct to want to answer that, but I'm going to just suppress it for the moment because I'm afraid we're going to get bogged down. We're going to get bogged down into this, and I would like to have maybe another discussion with you in the future regarding this because I come from another discipline, and so maybe I don't have the best idea. I read different philosophers. I read different critiques of analytic philosophy, and I do find some points where I agree with the critics of analytic philosophy. But I wanted to say something positive and take a step back for a moment, because there's a sense in which I really dislike these discussions. I want to get a bit political for a second here, in that I think we might be moving towards an idiocracy for a bunch of reasons. That has to do with our algorithms, how our algorithms are set up to capture our attentions, and the fact that we're not really truth-seeking machines as humans. And I'm kind of worried when people I feel like you and other analytic philosophers have big debates, because I feel like you are people who can reason very well, and I see you as people who kind of cherish truth and protect truth in a way through humanity. And I would like us to take a more active role in the sense of enlarging the rationalist community in a way that I think it would do a great benefit to the Earth in its totality. What do you think about what I just said?
I mean, I'm certainly in favor of expanding the community of people who are thinking rationally about important issues. I think that you can have a community like this, and then also have disagreements about various things between people in the community. So, I think you can both have disagreements between analytic philosophers and have analytic philosophers sort of recognize that, okay, we're thinking about things clearly, and sadly, lots of people are not. And so, we should cherish each other in not being completely dogmatic or irrational. I do think that the average quality of the discussion between analytic philosophers about almost every issue, including political issues, is way higher than the average quality of the conversation between people who are not analytic philosophers.
Yeah. So in a way, I see these debates about analytic philosophy as a bit different regarding the ones on continental philosophy, because it seems like the critique is coming from within the building. It seems like it counts towards in favor of a field of analytic philosophy, that it's analytic philosophers that critique and the structure of analytic philosophy.
I think that's right.
Point.
I think the best critics of analytic philosophy are analytic philosophers, which says something nice about analytic philosophy. One thing I will say about the critics, I do find there to be something puzzling about it, because one thing that I think spending time reading a lot of analytic philosophy and thinking about it, I've just taken away lots of these important, not intuitive, concrete, specific insights. So, for example, one insight that I think a person could take away from analytic philosophy is the normal way that we eat meat is almost certainly seriously immoral, right? This is something that lots of analytic philosophers think and have written about. And the basic case for it being immoral is when you purchase meat, you cause animals to suffer for days or weeks on end for the sake of a meal. Nearly all animals live in these torturous factory farms where they're locked in a tiny cage, unable to turn around, in filth and feces. If you read about the conditions for animals, they're often subject to constant mutilation. They're constantly bombarded from, the feces of animals above them. 80% of pigs get pneumonia because they're forced to live in such hideous conditions for such a large portion of their life. They're subject to horrible kinds of mutilation. Their beak is sliced off in the case of chickens with no anesthetic. The tails of pigs are cut off. The reason they trim the beaks, by the way, in the case of chickens, is that the conditions are so bad that they go crazy and start attacking each other. So like one important takeaway from analytic philosophy is that this is bad, and if you pay for meat, you are causing more of this, so you shouldn't do that. Another takeaway from analytic philosophy is that so there's something called the repugnant conclusion. And the idea of the repugnant conclusion, the conclusion is that a world with 10 billion people living really awesome lives is less good than a world with tons and tons of people with just barely worthwhile lives. So lots of people think this is unintuitive. How could it be that tons of people living just barely worthwhile lives is better than 10 billion people living awesome lives? One of the takeaways from analytic philosophy is that so long as you accept certain very minimal conditions, then inevitably the repugnant conclusion follows. And incidentally, Humer, who's not a utilitarian, has a paper called In Defense of Repugnance, where he shows how from 3 minimal conditions, with those conditions being, let's see if I can remember them. First, that if you add people with positive lives and make everyone better off, that's an improvement to the world. Second, that if the two worlds have the same populations, but one of them has a higher average utility, has a higher total utility, and a more equal distribution of utility, then it's a better world. And the third condition is that the better than relation is transitive, that if A is better than B and B is better than C, then A is better than C. So long as you accept these three, then you have to accept the repugnant conclusion. And he goes through the proof in the paper. Though it's actually, the proof isn't too confusing, but it's easier to see on a graph. So I just feel like there are so many things like this where they're not at all intuitive. They're not the things you would have expected at first, but they're actually really important and relevant to how you should think about the world. But I find there to be something puzzling about people who seem to think that analytic philosophy has no important takeaways. I just think there's so many important takeaways that you get from analytic philosophy, so many truths you discover that are not at all trivial and that are not at all the sorts of things that you would expect.
No, I definitely agree with you there, Matthew, in the sense that I think analytic philosophy, one would say, has brought us modal logic and has brought us results in logic. For example, that are very important from a pragmatic perspective. I'm an admirer of analytic philosophy because I read a lot of it and I use the tools of analytic philosophy. I feel like the tools of being clear, of constructing an argument, I think that's all very beneficial. Where I think I'm a bit more, where things get more mysterious to me is that I don't think there's a reason. Sometimes I get this feeling that some analytic philosophers want to inflate the ontology of the things that exist. So they will claim maybe moral realists do this. I'm a moral realist of a naturalist kind and not of a non-naturalist kind. And so sometimes I don't think there's really a need to presuppose the existence of things that we can't naturally observe. I think this is a tendency that I see in analytic philosophy. And I think I would be very happy with just saying what I said before, that we have some epistemic principles that maybe pragmatic is not the correct word, but we are biologically more in line with accepting them as true, in the sense that if I raise my hand right now, we both of us immediately get an input that this counts towards evidence that I've raised my hand, that this is a true fact. And I think truth basically is a mimetic structure that has been ensconced in us by a Baldwin effect. And it's all quite understandable in natural terms. I don't see where we need anything non-natural to explain what's going on. Truth is obviously very important, a very important concept from an evolutionary perspective to have for humans. And so the fact that I see things moving and they count for evidence that maybe if that high grass is moving, then a tiger is behind that high grass, is an important epistemic principle for my survival. And these things are so second nature to me that I agree that in natural language we call them truth, and I think we should keep on doing that. And so I essentially agree with a lot of the seemings that you and Michael Humer have, or a lot of other people in philosophy have. I agree with a lot of the intuitions regarding morality. In fact, I'm a utilitarian too, like you, normatively, or at least close to it. I don't know what our favorite. I don't know what our favorite flavors are, but do you see where I'm coming from? That if you just accept these, I think, not even that controversial things, that we have some mimetic structures that are inbuilt in us by a Baldwin effect, everything sort of seems to flow quite naturally, like our concept of truth, why we all seem to share similar intuitions about stuff when we reflect on them for a certain amount of time. And I get the feeling that I'm an outsider, I repeat, so I defer to the expertise of philosophers like you and like others. I get the feeling that there isn't sometimes this attention to want to naturalize things, when I think it's quite plausible to naturalize many things that philosophers talk about in analytic philosophy.
So I think there certainly in analytic philosophy is a strong desire to naturalize lots of things. A very substantial portion of analytic philosophers are naturalists about morality. There are lots of naturalist moral realists. And there are lots of philosophers, they like reductionism about all sorts of things. That said, I tend to fall more on the non-reductionist side. And of course, figuring out whether non-reductionism is right on a whole range of issues would require reflecting on lots of different issues. Regarding the idea that just evolution builds us with certain intuitions, and that's the only takeaway. The problem is if you don't think if you think that the only reason that we should trust our that basically all we want is a theory that explains why we have the intuitions that we do, and that evolution explains that why we have the intuitions that we do, then the puzzle is you can come up with lots of other theories that also explain why we have the intuitions we do. But to the 5-minute Earth theory, that theory also explains why we have all the intuitions that we do. But nonetheless, that's a very poor theory. But in order to rule out that theory, it isn't enough to say, evolution gives us the intuitions that disfavor it, because the point is the theory is supposed to be a candidate to evolution. So you can't assume evolution in arguing against it. I think that in order to rule out these obviously ridiculous hypotheses, in order to trust in to trust in the deliverances of the natural sciences, you need to think that we get to have a default trust in our intuitions, that our intuitions about, say, how we think the natural world is likelier to work on the basis of our intuitions actually track how the natural world is likelier to work. There are all sorts of theories you could come up with that would fit our experiences, but so long as you don't think our intuitions track the goings on in the natural world, then that we have sort of a priori reason to think that, then you're just in complete skepticism. Regarding morality,
okay.
Or sorry, do you want to say something about that, or I can talk about morality?
No, I was just going to say that we're veering back to this discussion that I would love to have another time with you. I realize it's my fault for bringing up something similar. But no, say what you want to say about morality, and then I think we should go to the anthropic principle, because otherwise I'm going to enjoy my time a bit too much, and we might have like a lot of disagreement of anthropic principle stuff. So say what you want to say about morality, and then we'll just go to that.
Yeah. So I think there are a few different reasons to think that moral non-naturalism is true. One of them is, and this is probably the one that's going to be the least persuasive to a naturalist, but it's one that I find persuasive. It just doesn't seem like moral naturalism is able to capture the sort of the genuine normativity of morality. So it seems like there are things that really matter, that genuinely make demands on what you ought to do. And insofar as words like right, wrong, good, and bad, these are just fancy ways of talking about bits of the natural world, then it's not clear how they can have their sort of oomphiness, how they can have genuine normative significance. If when you say murder is wrong, all you mean is murder instantiates some natural property, well, then it's not clear why the natural property is the sort of thing that we should care about, or that we have a reason to care about. So I don't think it captures the kind of oomphiness of morality, where the things really matter. The other point
but
is
the oomphiness comes from the fact that we are naturally predisposed to really care about the suffering of children, about the suffering of innocent people, about our own suffering. And we are social creatures, so we know that other humans have similar predispositions in the moral sphere. So we have an idea of what is a good cooperator. And
right, but imagine an alien species where they have completely different predispositions, where their dispositions they're in favor of malevolence and evil, and in fact they use moral terms slightly differently. So the optimal semantic account that regulates their use of moral terms results in all sorts of activities that we regard as wicked. On your view, where it seems like morality just reflects kind of like the like broad scale moral intuitions of our species, it's hard to see that there are any grounds on which we could say, well, our moral judgments that you shouldn't go around stabbing people are correct and theirs are wrong. And I think if you don't think we can say that, then morality lacks a genuine oomphiness.
Well, I would say we can say that from our, we can say that from our, yes, I agree. This is a good you bring up. I agree with what you're saying. And so it is true that a naturalist is a bit stuck with this conundrum that it's only universalizable to the human race or to, let's say, non-sociopathic humans. So humans who actually have the moral chip, let's call it that way, just to simplify things. And this is a good objection, I think, you raise, but perhaps you just can't. Like, if there's another alien species and they would tell us, look, for us, morality is this, and we have all these reasons we have all these intuitive reasons that we get from their biology or from their God for why morality is this way. Perhaps there is this disagreement, but I don't think it does anything to tackle my weaker form of morality. Yeah, I will agree with you that this makes naturalism weaker than other forms of morality, but I don't know that it counts against it, because this would come up in these. I don't think it counts against the truthfulness of it. If you see what I mean.
Right. So. Oh
God, we're going to get into another discussion now. We're going to get another discussion.
Yeah. So I think it does count against the truthfulness. So maybe it would be helpful to give an analogy. So on Earth, water refers to H2O. Imagine we came across aliens, and these were vaguely humanoid aliens. They're like us, they look like us, and so on. There's one important difference. On their planet, they have this clear liquid substance that they call water, but it's not made out of H2O. It's made out of XYZ, right? It's made out of some different chemical structure. If we see a thing of water and we're like, that's water, and they're like, no, that's not water, this is water, and they point to XYZ, there's no fact of the matter about who's right. And so on moral naturalism, the idea is the moral terms get their meaning in a similar way. So if we point to, child rape and we say that's wrong, and the aliens point to child rape and say, no, that's right, based on the way that the terms are regulated on our world, there's no fact of the matter about who's in error. And I think this is really counterintuitive. I think that it is a problem with a view of metaphysics if it implies that, when we and the aliens disagree and have our different semantic frameworks, that basically neither of us are right about whether child rape is really wrong, that it's just sort of relative to a linguistic community. And this implies even more counterintuitively that suppose you look at an instance of child rape and you're like, okay, I want to know if that's wrong. In order to know if it's wrong, you need to know what your linguistic community is. If you hit your head and you can't remember if you are from our Earth or the other Earth, right? So you can't remember if if the morality that sort of, governs the linguistic framework is the one on our world or the one on the world where they're pro-child rape, then this implies very counterintuitively that in order to know whether or not child rape is immoral, you have to know where you currently are located. And that doesn't seem right. It doesn't seem like to figure out if things are wrong, you need to know where you're located, and if you're located in a place where the dominant moral location is something. Now, regarding...
No, you're a straw man in my view. No, sorry. No, no. Why do you say it depends on the linguistic or with a location? I think it depends on the biology. Like if I'm in my body, I have a moral chip that if I reason through system 2 thinking, gives me some moral truths. Give me what I would call some moral truths.
Yeah. So I guess if you think it's just the morality that's biologically programmed into us, I mean, first of all, you get the same worry of, okay, then it's not fixed by the linguistic framework, but it's fixed by features of your biology. So if you imagine someone gives you a drug where you can't remember what your moral intuitions are like.
No.
Where?
No, wait a minute. I can help you. Yes, if a surgeon extracts, I don't know, a part of my brain, which I believe, I don't know if it works like this, but let's just assume it works like this, where there are moral intuitions, and I think this is what happens exactly in psychopaths, in people who do not have moral intuitions. I think this is what happened in them. Then yes, I would lose my moral intuitions.
Right. Okay. So if a psychopath utters suppose there's a psychopath who's pro torture, and they utter the sentence, "Torture is morally perfectly fine." Is that true or is that false?
That's false for me. Now, that's false in the way we conceptualize morality as humans, as the way I would define morality as a human being, as a sane human being that has a moral chip. That's false because we have defined morality in such a way that it's this natural property that we have regarding cooperation.
So now you're talking. Yeah, so now you're talking about how we have defined morality. So that has to do with how a linguistic community defines terms. And the point is, in the case where the alien linguistic community has defined their terms differently, if you don't know if you're part of your linguistic community or the alien's linguistic community, then you don't know if the action is right or wrong. Right? So on our Earth,
we would quickly reach an agreement, wouldn't we? Like if I would say, if they would say rape in, well, it depends. If they have different moral intuitions, if they have different biological intuitions, then we would not reach an agreement. But if they have similar biological intuitions, even if they have different linguistic terms, even if they say, oh, look, rape in a child is wrong. And we say, no, wait a minute, rape in a child is no. So they would say rape in a child is right. And we would say, no, that's completely wrong. That's not good. And then they would tell us, so what do you mean? So you actually, they would mimic, I don't know, with gestures. They would say, so you go there and you prod the child. Then we would say, oh no, look, it's just a linguistic confusion we're having here. We actually agree. It's just a semantic confusion that's going on. We would quickly redefine terms in a way that we would understand each other. That's what I think would happen.
So the point is, so if we have the disagreement with the aliens about morality, where on their linguistic community, the way the words right and wrong are regulated are such that, torture is considered right, and on our world, torture is considered wrong. So on this picture, basically, when we have a disagreement with the aliens, there's no fact of the matter about which of us is correct. We're correct relative to our standard, just as they're correct relative to their standard. But neither of us are correct writ large, just like when we disagree about whether water is H2O or water is XYZ, we're not having a genuine disagreement with the aliens. It's, it's just we use different words differently. But I would want to say, no, if the aliens are pro-torture and murder, I think the aliens are going wrong. Okay. And the point I was making about the linguistic community. So, okay, imagine you have human moral intuitions, but you can't remember if you're one of the, so on the alien world, there are the alien equivalent of the psychopaths, where the normal alien morality is equivalent to human psychopaths, but they have people who they consider like psychopaths who have normal human morality, where they like think, you shouldn't harm people and so on. And so you can't remember if you have human morality, or if you have you can't remember if you have human morality, or if you have or if you were born on the alien world and thus have morality that deviates from the alien's moral system and biological chip and so on. In that case, if you want to say that like when the psychopaths on our world utter the sentence "torture is fine," they're going wrong, and the reason they're going wrong is that the broader linguistic community involves, and the way wrong is defined more broadly, involves torture being wrong. Then you'd have to say, well, that if it turns out that you're on the alien world and you say helping people is good and torture is bad, then you would be wrong. And so then if you can't remember if you're on this world or on the alien world, then in order to figure out if some act of torture is wrong, you would need to know like what your location is, or more precisely, what linguistic community you had been raised in that regulates the use of your terms. And I think all of these things are very counterintuitive. And this is why I say it sort of captures the substantiveness of morality, where I think for something to be, a serious kind of morality, it has to be that if there's some alien civilization that has just this horribly repressive, evil morality, that we want to say they're morally going wrong and we're right. Maybe we're not always right, but at least when they say torture is great and we say torture is bad, we're correct in that dispute. And on this view, neither of us is correct. There isn't a fact of the matter. We're correct relative to our standard, they're correct relative to their standard, and there's no broader standard that determines which of us is correct overall.
Okay, so maybe just the last question. I can't help myself, can I? Maybe just the last question. So a problem I have, because I would like this view to be true. So I'm very much inclined to want moral realism of a non-naturalist kind to be true. It would give me great pleasure, I think, because I would even like there to be a God and to be an afterlife and all these things. So I would be inclined to believe these things.
Well,
so one thing that troubles me, this is going to be a bit like, yeah, I know that. But so one thing that troubles me is, I think, so your view kind of, in some sense, presupposes that our intuitions are bringing us in contact with this kind of non-natural substance in some way. Am I right? Our intuitions are in contact. There's with some non-natural moral truth sphere.
I don't know if that's how I'd phrase it, but yeah, I mean, I think our moral intuitions will at least be partially explained by facts about non-natural domains.
Okay, that's it with talking about this. Thank you for entertaining my nonsense. Now to something that I might know a bit more of, which is statistics. So famously on your lovely Substack, which I will recall is called Bentham Bulldog on Substack, you defend this argument, which you really like. You consider it the best argument for the existence of God, which is the Anthropic argument. And this argument is based on an assumption, a premise, I don't know how we want to call it, but it's called the self-indication assumption. And the self-indication assumption tells us that we should reason as if when we are faced with the option of believing in a world where there is less people and one where there's more, we should reason as if the world where there's more people is more probable. You can correct me in a second if I said something mistaken. And I am unsure of the self-indication assumption being true. But I'm pausing here because you can correct my
Oh, okay.
introduction.
So what you said is basically right. I have a few like small tweaks. I think what SIA tells you to think there are more of is not people in general, right? So imagine there are two theories. Theory one, so imagine a coin gets flipped. If it comes up heads, like one male gets created. And if it comes up tails, one male and 9 females get created. So I'm a male, it turns out. So if I get created from this, SIA doesn't tell you to think tails is likelier than heads. What matters isn't the total number of people. What matters is the number of people that you might presently be. So what SIA says is a theory that says that there are X times as many people that you might presently be predicts your present existence X times as well. So if a coin gets flipped and if it comes up heads, 1 person gets created. And if it comes up tails, 10 people get created. Then if you get created from this process, SIA says that you should think that tails is 10 times likelier than heads, because the idea is it makes your existence 10 times likelier.
Okay.
So yeah, that's
okay, sorry, you had stopped for a second. Okay, lovely. So it's my understanding that one of the reasons why you believe in the self-indication assumption comes from the sleeping beauty problem. Is this correct? So you believe in the self-indication assumption because of the sleeping beauty problem?
No, not really. Yeah, no, I mean, the self-indication assumption does give you reason to think that, say, thirding is correct in Sleeping Beauty. And I think there are arguments for why thirding is correct. So I guess this raises the likelihood of SIA a little bit. But really, I think it's more to use statistical language. Rather than A giving rise to B, it's more C gives rise to A and B. So I think there are arguments that both establish that SIA is right and that thirding in Sleeping Beauty is correct.
Okay. So there are independent arguments for why the self-indication assumption is correct.
Yeah, that's correct. On my blog, I have a WordPress blog, not my main blog. This is just like a blog where like when I just have a thought that I think like no one will be interested in, but I want to write down, I like make a post about it called the Anthropic Thoughts. On that blog, I have a post where I just go present all the arguments for SIA, mostly with just hyperlinks. And in total, there are like 25 or something of them. So it's not just one argument for SIA. Now, obviously, if you have 25 arguments for conclusion, they're not all going to be great, but all of them were good enough that I thought that we should include them on the list. They were all at least okay. I think all of them provide at least some evidence for SIA, and some of them I think are just really knocked down. But maybe I could describe some of them, or if you want to give your objection first, we can do that.
Well, maybe this. Well, yeah. Maybe describe your favorite. Yeah, why not?
Okay, so the argument for SIA that I think is the best is, okay, let's just consider a simple case. So 1 person gets created, then a coin gets flipped, and if it comes up tails, 999 other people get created. So now suppose that you get created, and you have no idea when you were created, right? So you don't know if you're the first person, the second person, the third person. You're completely in the dark. So on SIA, you should think tails is 1,000 times likelier than heads at this point. And if you reject SIA, you should think heads and tails are equally likely. After all, heads and tails, they only differ in regards to the number of people that get created. And views other than SIA say that a theory that says that there are more people doesn't necessarily make your existence more likely. So you get created. SIA says tails is 1,000 times likelier than heads. And non-SIA views disagree. Now suppose you're informed, actually you're the first person, okay? So you're the one person who exists before the coin flip. Well, let's apply Bayesian conditionalization. Let's update in accordance with Bayes' rule. And even if you reject Bayesian conditionalization, as I show in a recent article, the one about the anthropic argument, you get basically the same argument, but it's a little more complicated to show how it works. So let's just assume you adopt Bayesian conditionalization. So Bayesian conditionalization the basic idea is if you learn something that's n times likelier on one theory than another theory, then the first theory goes up by a factor of n. So if previously you're indifferent between two theories, and then you learn something that's 5 times as likely on the first theory, then you'll think that the first theory is 5 times as likely as the second theory because it gets a 5-to-1 update. So you learn you're the first person. Now, the probability that you would be the first person, given that the coin comes up heads, is 100%. If you knew that the coin came up heads, you'd be guaranteed to be the first person. In contrast, if the coin comes up tails, you could be any of the 1,000 people. And so if you reject SIA, you think, okay, you were previously indifferent between heads and tails, between the coin coming up heads and tails, and now you learned that you're the first person, which is 1,000 times as likely if the coin comes up heads. So now you should think that it's 1,000 times likelier that the coin comes up heads than that it comes up tails. But wait a minute, now you know that you're the first person. So if you reject SIA, now that you know that you're the first person, now you think at 1,000-to-1 odds that a fair coin that hasn't been flipped yet will come up heads just based on the fact that if it comes up tails, a bunch of people will be created. If somehow you disabled the property by which a bunch of people would be created if it came up tails, then you would go back to being 50-50. And this is a utterly bizarre and counterintuitive result where your credence in a fair future chancy event turning out some way should just equal its objective probability, assuming you don't have any special evidence that tells you it'll turn out some way. Your credence in a coin that hasn't been flipped yet coming up heads, unless like an oracle tells you how it turns out, should be 50%. And so if you accept that, then you just have SIA will inevitably follow. So that's sort of one kind of core argument for SIA. And by changing around the numbers, you can get even more extreme results. So if rather than 999 people existing on tails, if infinity people would exist on tails, or 10 billion, then you can get even more. The same principle will apply just to any case where SIA applies. So yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Okay, lovely. So I totally agree with your reasoning, except that we do not need the self-indication assumption. So it's good that you brought up this example because it goes to the essence of, I think, what my problem is as a statistician regarding what's going on. So I think your reasoning simply follows from Kolmogorov axioms of probability and by how the problem is set up. I think we should simplify the discussion for example for a second to reason about it better between each other. So in your latest post, you say, suppose you get created. So let's imagine a coin gets flipped. And if it comes up heads, only John gets created. If it comes up tails, John and Jack get created. Suppose you get created, but you're not sure if you're John or Jack. What odds should you give the coin having come up heads? And the self-indication assumption answers 1/3. And so I take this, and then I'm going to let you speak now to not get you wrong. I take you to mean that in the Sleeping Beauty problem also, the self-indication assumption gives us probability 1/3.
Yeah, SIA does give you a probability of 1/3 in Sleeping Beauty. That's correct.
Okay.
Maybe it would be useful to explain for listeners just what the Sleeping Beauty problem is, in case they don't know.
Well, thank you, Matthew, and I leave you the honor to do that.
Okay, sure. So the Sleeping Beauty problem, the idea is you're put to sleep on Sunday and a coin is flipped. If it comes up heads, you wake up once on Monday and you have no memories. And if it comes up tails, you wake up once on Monday, then your memories are erased, and then you wake up a second time on Tuesday. So the idea is if it comes up heads, you wake up once with no memories. If it comes up tails, you wake up twice with no memories. The idea of the Sleeping Beauty problem, so the question is, after you wake up and you don't have any memories, what should your credence be that the coin came up heads? And there are basically two main answers. One of the answers is 1/2, and the other answer is 1/3. The third are say you wake up twice as much of tails, and so upon waking up, you should think tails is twice as likely as heads. Well, the halfers say that you didn't learn anything new, so you should be 50-50. Now, I could go into detail about what's wrong with Haver's argument, but no, which I've done in various places. But
yeah, so the Haver's argument is pretty wrong, unless the question is disambiguated to mean at the time of the coin flipping or during the coin flipping, what is the chance that the coin comes up heads or tails? So then I think the answer is 1/2. But I think the question that the problem is posing is after you wake up and you're asked, so conditioning on the fact that you've waked up and you're asked about the coin, the one further position, in my view, if you construct a statistical sample of the problem, and you interpret the question in the way I think the problem is alluding to, then you get 1/3, and you don't need the self-indication assumption to get 1/3. The probability simply comes up 1/3. An interesting way that I want to argue right now here about this factor is, I think the main point here, I think I pinned down the main point where I might have a disagreement with your reasoning in these lovely posts you put online, is the fact that you always start with saying, if we flip a coin, then we reason this way. And I agree with all your reasoning if a randomization process is flipping a coin. If God was flipping a coin and then deciding in the universes, then I think all your reasoning follows. You don't even need the self-indication assumption. But what we don't know is this randomization procedure, because in the Sleeping Beauty problem, or even in the argument you brought up before, let's now assume that instead of flipping a coin, we use a Dirac delta. And what's a Dirac delta? Simply a coin with 2 heads. So we eliminate the randomness. This is a degenerate random variable, a degenerate it's a degenerate probability distribution, but for our reasoning, we don't care. So let's just assume that the coin has 2 heads. Now, if the coin has 2 heads, well, the argument becomes trivial. The question to a problem becomes trivial, but notice that the self-indication assumption in the case of this randomization procedure would lead us to an incorrect conclusion. So if a randomization procedure is different than a coin flip, the self-indication assumption, I think we have to focus on this point if we want to reach. So I'll just repeat it and I'll let you speak. I'm sorry, I'm speaking for a bit. But if we change the randomization procedure, and it's not the coin flipping anymore, but it's I choose with a Dirac delta, or we can think about it of flipping a coin with both sides heads, then the self-indication assumption gives us a wrong conclusion in how to evaluate the probabilities in this problem.
I don't think that's true. I think the self-indication assumption will completely agree with how you're talking about it with the case that you gave. What the self-indication assumption says is basically you should treat your existence as giving you an update by a Bayes factor equal to the number of times more people that you might be on one theory than another. So if there's one theory that says there are 10 times as many people as another, you get a 10-to-1 Bayes factor in favor of that theory. Now, in the case you gave, you start out certain that the coin came up heads because it's 100% guaranteed to come up heads. So if you get a 10-to-1 Bayes factor in favor of a theory that starts out with a prior of 0, you end up, after updating, with a posterior of 0. So the self-indication assumption completely agrees that in that case, you end up certain in heads. The idea is just you get an update in favor of a theory that says that there are more people.
Oh, okay, lovely. So I think we can have a fix for this. But in any case, just to get me on the same page as you, I thought the self-indication assumption. So let's say God is flipping this tricked coin with both heads. And doesn't the self-indication assumption just tell me to reason? And he's creating 2 universes, one with a gazillion people and one with 10 people. The self-indication assumption, could you repeat how in this setting, where God is flipping this tricked coin, how the self-indication assumption would tell me to reason?
Okay, so sorry, let me just see if I'm getting the setup right. Is the idea that if it comes up heads, then like one person gets created and tails, like 1 trillion people get created or something, but it's a tricked coin, so it always comes up heads?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the self-indication assumption says, well, so you get an update in favor of heads, in favor of tails, but you get an update from 0 to 0 because when you get an update by a Bayes factor of n, that just means that the theory, it goes up. The relative.
I agree. No, I agree. I agree with what you're saying, and I think that exactly plays against you. Though I completely agree with what you said. Because now we know this randomization procedure, we get no update. But all the times you argue with the self-indication assumption, you're arguing as if there was this random coin flip. But we do not know. The problem I'm trying to point out is that we do not know what is the randomization procedure that comes that God chooses. We don't know how God chooses it. Maybe he chooses it as a Gaussian distribution. Maybe he chooses it as a Dirac delta. Maybe he chooses it as an all other plethora of distributions. And because all the reasoning starts from the assumption that this randomization procedure is going to be 1/2, then it leads us to all your implications that I think are correct. But they all presuppose a certain randomization procedure at the time of the initial time.
I think maybe you're reading too much into the specific examples. The point of SIA is just a theory that says there are n times as many people that you might be. That theory predicts your present existence n times as well. Now, in the Dirac delta case, you'll still end up being certain that the coin came up heads because you start out thinking that heads is infinitely likelier than tails. Tails has a prior of 0. And so in other cases, certainly if you start out thinking that the odds that God would make an infinite world are 0, then after concluding that God would make an infinite world, your posterior is also 0, right? You update from 0 to 0. However, if you think that God wouldn't make an infinite world, that God would instead, that you think there's some chance that God would make a infinite world, then you'll get a massive update in favor of the theory on which God makes an infinite world. Where the idea is, so just the way you should think about objective probabilities and subjective probability in terms of Bayesian update is symmetrical between the two of them, right? So in both cases, so in the case of both an objective and a subjective probability, if you start out with it of 1% and then you get a 10-to-1 update in favor of it, you'll end up with it at 10%. I think that's right. So suppose, let's be really conservative. Let's say the odds that God would make infinite people, some big infinity worth of people, are only 20% if he exists, right? The conditional, the probability that would be reasonable to assign to this big infinite world if you knew God existed is 20%. What's much lower on atheism. And so from the fact your existence gives you this massive update in favor of thinking, this infinitely strong update in favor of thinking that there's a big infinity worth of people, according to SIA. And then once you conclude that, then that gives you a big update in favor of thinking that theism is right.
Yes, no, I think I agree with all of that, but it starts from, because it all presupposes the self-indication assumption. But talking about math via voice is a bit hard. So I was thinking now that maybe I should write the Substack where my critique is more precise, so we can see if my critique is incorrect or if I'm getting to something. But
that sounds good. Sorry.
No, please.
One thing that might be helpful. Just can you? One thing I'm currently not clear on is there any case where you think the self-indication assumption gets an incorrect result? Because I think we saw in the Dirac delta
not to
get an incorrect result. But.
Yeah, in the Dirac. Yeah, sorry. In the that's a good question, Matthew. That's a good question. So I think my critique was to your reasoning to why the self-indication assumption was true. So the example you brought up was if we flip if we flip a coin, and then we reason of how many people are going to be created. There's a universe when only Jack is created. Then there's a universe where Jack and Bob are created. Then this would support the self-indication assumption because the probability that I should think I'm Jack is 1/3. I don't remember now if I said more Jacks or more Bobs. But that would support the self-indication assumption in some way. Or maybe this is where maybe I'm not understanding. What is your justification for the self-indication assumption in this? I flip a coin and it's 1/2, and there's these two different worlds. Perhaps you should repeat that to me.
Okay, so let's say that one person's created, Jack, then a coin's flipped, and if it comes up tails, Bob is also created. So here's our judgment that basically only SIA holds. If you look at its competitors in the literature, they don't also hold this. One of them does sort of, but we could remodify.
No, but this is going to be, I think, the heart of the disagreement, because I don't think that SIA holds what you're about to say. I think probability theory and basically Kolmogorov's axiom hold that once you well define the problem and there's a certain sample space, then yes, the value comes out 1/3 as the self-indication assumption would say. But it's not like...
Okay, but my point is that, so the only difference between heads and tails is that tails predicts twice as many people as heads, right? And so if SIA has an explanation of why you should think tails is twice as likely as heads. While on non-SIA views, they generally don't hold that you should think tails is twice as likely as heads. And if you think that that in this case tails is twice as likely as heads, by virtue of predicting twice as many people as the heads coin flips, the heads coin flip predicts because they have twice as many people. Then it's hard to see, well, why in normal cases where if in this case where tails means 2 people get created and heads means one person gets created, shouldn't tails get a 2-to-1 update? Then why in a normal case where, say, 2 people get created, shouldn't that get a 2-to-1 update in favor of heads? And if it should, then why shouldn't, you can get the same basic argument just by changing the numbers around to get the conclusion that you should think infinity people are created. Right, so in this case, it would be one person's created, a coin's flipped. If it comes up tails, then infinity other people are created. Let's call the first guy Bob. So let's consider there are three possible kinds of outcomes. Outcome 1 is your Bob and the coin will come up tails. Outcome 2, or your Bob and the coin will come up heads. Outcome 2 is your Bob and the coin will come up tails. And outcome 3 is you're one of the infinity people after Bob. So the idea is the first 2 are equally likely. If you're Bob, it's just as likely as it'll come up heads as that it'll come up tails. And the third scenario, that you're one of the infinity people after Bob, is infinitely likelier than the second scenario, that your Bob and the coin will come up tails. So therefore, 100% of the probability space gets vacuumed up by the later people. So the reasoning that we're applying in these limited cases just generalizes to result in thinking that you should be certain of infinite people, which is a judgment that's utterly unique to SIA. So you're saying, like, this is just what happens when you apply basic probability theory. And this is kind of my thought. I think SIA basically just is what you get when you apply basic probability theory to questions where you're uncertain about your existence. If you want to see more about that, I think I talk about it in section 3.4. Have called precisely defining the self-indication assumption shows that it's right. Okay.
So the self-indication assumption gets you the correct answer if the coin flip is a fair coin flip. So let me try to maybe we can get closer to agreeing on something. If I look at the Wikipedia page of a Sleeping Beauty problem, because I came up with it like reading your writings. I found it interesting, and I wasn't a 1/3. I just sort of constructed a sample space, and I think the result comes up 1/3, as you rightly say, in the Sleeping Beauty case. But then I went on Wikipedia, and I read a part of this article that I thought is basically my view regarding the Sleeping Beauty problem. I think my view is that the Sleeping Beauty problem is an ambiguous question position, in the sense that, let me read from Wikipedia, the question, what is your credence that the coin comes up heads, is a bit ambiguous. And I think the question should be disambiguated in what is your credence that the coin lands heads in the act of tossing, and what is your credence that the coin lands head in the toss to set up this awakening? Or if I ask you after you've been awoken and I tell you that we're doing this experiment, then you end up with these two, you end up with different probabilities. And I think this is exactly right, in the sense that the credence, what is the credence that the coin lands heads in the act of tossing is obviously 1/2. And we construct a different sample space for that type of problem than the one we would construct for the 1/3 position. And what is the credence that the coin lands head in the toss to set up this awakening? Well, that will get you 1/3. Yeah. So notice that in this kind of reasoning of the ambiguous question position, I never appeal to any assumption. It's just to me it seems like natural statistical probabilistic reasoning. I would go as far as to say that I think that most statisticians or mathematicians that you show this problem to would just straightforwardly say that once you disambiguate the question, then you get 1/3. The 1/3 answer is right, but not because of the self-indication assumption. Although here maybe is a part where I'm misunderstanding, because you don't say that is because of the 1/3 assumption. Maybe we agree on this point.
Yeah. What I was thinking was that, I mean, first of all, once you accept thirding, then once you okay. So let's see, what order should I say the things I want to say? Okay. First of all, I think that there are people who think that the problem's ambiguous, but I don't think there's much ambiguity. I think everyone gets that the question is, what is your credence after you wake up? Obviously, no one disagrees that before tossing the coin, you should think there's a 50% chance it'll come up heads. Question is what your credence should be after you wake up. Now, I don't think there's a huge amount of disagreement among both mathematicians and philosophers about the Sleeping Beauty problem, which is sad because the answer is clear. But nonetheless, there's still a lot of disagreement.
It's clearly 1/3.
Yeah, I think it's 1/3. Now, if you think it's 1/3, then, I mean, the reasoning that gets you to 1/3 is kind of similar to the reasoning that gets you to SIA, where the idea is okay, if tails predicting 2 awakenings is twice as likely, a tails predicting, say, infinity awakenings would be infinitely likelier. And so then if you apply similar reasoning across people to the reasoning that you apply within one person's life, then you get a similar reasoning leading you to think that there are infinite people. And just imagine that the coin is rigged, so it almost always comes up heads. It comes up heads 99.9% of the time. In this case, if tails means infinite coin flips, you'd still be certain of tails. And so in an analogous way, the theory that there are infinite people, even if you assign that 0.01% probability or 0.1% probability, your prior and this 0.1%, you get an infinitely big update based on it predicting infinitely many more people existing. And so by similar reasoning, you get an infinite update in favor of that.
Yeah, I think I might agree with everything you just said, but how do we know the randomization? So, as you rightly said before, instead, if the coin is rigged, we get 0% update. So why would we? So
we have to distinguish. So you're talking about your credence in what you should think the process is like before you update. So SIA is not about what you should think the process is like before you update. SIA is about the degree of the update. So it says the update factor should be by a factor n, where n is the number of times more people, or more precisely, more time slices that you might be on one theory than another. Now, if we apply this to a case where you start out with a prior of 0 in one theory, then when we update, you end up with a posterior of 0, just because that's what happens if you start with a prior of 0, you end up with a posterior of 0. But in a different case, where if you have any finite prior in theories on which there are infinite people, and you apply SIA, you apply that update, then you just end up with certainty that there are infinite people. Because
how do we know that God is not using a Dirac delta then? I guess my problem then is
I see the worry. So the idea is that if you're uncertain about so maybe you think like, okay, you have some credence that God uses a process that always makes 0 people, or always makes a finite number of people. Sorry. So the idea is, if you're not sure about the outcome of some process, if you're uncertain about it, well, then if you get an infinitely big update in favor of one outcome, then you should conclude that outcome's right. So here's an analogy. Imagine you don't know what the coin is like. You don't know if it has just one side. Maybe it has a bunch of different sides. You don't know if it's a Dirac delta. Maybe it's whatever the opposite of a Dirac delta is that always comes up tails. You don't know all the details about the coin. You have some uncertainty. But you know that if it comes up tails, you'll have infinite wakings. And if it comes up heads, you'll only have one waking. Well, upon waking up, by the same Sleeping Beauty reasoning, you should think now tails is infinitely likelier than heads. Because even though you weren't sure the process, what you should do is you should come to some overall all things considered credence, and then get a massive update from that overall all things considered credence in tails that makes it so that you then become certain of tails.
No, wait a minute, Matthew. I don't understand this passage you just said. So say I'm the Sleeping Beauty, and the scientists tell me, look, we're going to flip a rigged coin that has both heads. Then we're going to wake you up, and we're going to ask you, what's the probability that the coin is heads or tails? Well, in this degenerate case, the probability is always going to be it's always going to be 1. So I'm not sure you can reason as you just did, because the self-indication it doesn't hold true anymore. Like if you're told, if the scientists tell you, look, we're going to rig this coin, it's always going to come up heads, and then they put you to sleep and they ask you the question, when the rational answer is to say, well, it's obviously going to be Monday. I don't remember how we presented it. If we presented it as if fact she wakes up Monday, and then if it's tails, she wakes up Monday, and then they give her a potion, and then a memory cancelling potion puts her to sleep again, and then she wakes up Tuesday. But in this case, the correct way of reasoning is to say, no, it's you're always going to wake me up on Monday, because I know the probability. I mean, you're telling me the coin is rigged.
Right. So if the coin is rigged so that it always comes up heads, then that's right. But if you have any credence in a theory on which it comes up tails, and tails means infinite wakings and heads means only one waking, then after updating on the fact that you're awake, then you'll end up.
I see.
And so in an analogous way, if you think there's even a 1% chance that there would be an infinite world, then you get an infinite update for that.
Oh, I see. Oh, that's interesting. Oh, that's quite interesting. Okay, so if I have different credences, I might have to think about that. It's very nice. So, okay, so the problem goes a step deeper, in the sense that, let me see if I've got this correctly. Because I don't know what the randomization procedure is going to be, there's a possible plethora of these. And I should, if I only have a small credence in a different randomization procedure, then that small credence would get a big update
Yeah,
Oh.
and if that's the only one that predicts infinite people, it gets an infinitely big update. The infinite ones, so long as they start with a non-zero credence, they swallow up the entire probability space. Like an analogy is, let's imagine that the star is spelled out made by God. It's true that if you start out with treating it like the double delta case, or I forget what it's called, where you start with thinking God has a prior of 0 or something, then you'd say, okay, then you don't get any update at all. But so long as you think that there's a non-zero credence in it, then you'll get a big update in favor of that. And so similarly, if you have a non-zero credence in theories on which there are infinite people, then you get an infinitely big update in favor of those. And so then those swallow up the entire probability space. In particular, the biggest infinity swallows up the probability space because each infinity is infinitely larger than the one before it.
Okay, I think I have to think about this and do all my calculations with my sample space to confirm the reasoning. Have you written about this objection before?
No. I think it's, I think just once you're sort of clear on like how the kinematics of SIA works, sort of like, it becomes clearer how to think through these cases, and it becomes clearer that how to reason about them, and it becomes easier to see like why it doesn't imply crazy things. Assuming you have uncertainty about it. I mean, I talked about the broad principle of why you should have an infinite update in favor, why you should conditional on SIA be certain in an infinite world in my most recent post on the Anthropic argument. So I guess maybe that's the place where I talk about it the most, but.
Okay, but to be clear, like this objection, you came up with this answer on the fly to this objection in particular.
Yeah. I mean, okay, sorry. I don't know what this is going to sound slightly mean, but I don't think, I think that your objection relied on a bit of a misunderstanding of how SIA worked, or at least like how to think about your credences conditional on SIA. So like once you're sort of thinking about it, right, it becomes clear how to sort these things out. So it wasn't some novel insight that I had. It was just sort of applying SIA correctly in the way that I've talked about before. But sorry,
it's plenty possible. It's plenty possible, Matthew. I mean, I just looked at it for 2 days, but I will definitely ponder on what you said. Just for the last time. So, okay, for the last time. So the self-indication assumption. So I don't understand. So you say the self-indication assumption is just reasoning. You would just call it reasoning correctly with probabilities.
So it's controversial exactly how you're supposed to reason correctly with anthropic probabilities, right? It's controversial how you divvy up your credences between different people that you might be. So it isn't enough to just say, well, just apply probability theory, because there are lots of people who think that all they're doing is applying probability theory, and they get very different results. What's distinctive about SIA is, if you follow this insight, okay, then you get SIA. The core insight of SIA is your relative credence in you being each of two different time slices. I'll just talk about people, but the same point will apply to time slices. Your relative credence in being each of two people doesn't depend on the presence of a third person, right? So suppose you're trying to figure out how likely it is that you're John versus Jack. The relative likelihood of each of that doesn't depend on whether Mary exists, right? The overall probability maybe depends on whether Mary exists because you have some credence in you being Mary, but your credence in the ratio of your odds in you being John versus being Jack doesn't depend on the presence of other people. If that's right, then SIA just follows trivially as a result of basic probabilistic updating, where consider a case where heads is one person gets created and tails is 10 people get created. Well, the odds. So imagine only the first person would be created on tails. only the first person who gets created on tails. Well, then you'd think heads and tails were equally likely. But now imagine only the second person would be created on tails. Well, now you'd think heads and tails were equally likely, and so on for each of the 10 people. So for each of the 10 people, if they were the only person around, then the relative odds of heads and tails would be equal. And there are 10 of them, and the relative odds of you being each of the people doesn't depend on the presence of the other people, right? So the odds that you're the third person on tails versus the first person on heads doesn't depend on the presence of the other 10 people that exist on tails. So if all that's right, then just tails is 10 times likelier than heads. Sorry, I know that was confusing. If you want me spelling it out in more detail, I have a post called Precisely Defining the Self-Indication Assumption Shows That It's Correct, where I talk about this in more detail. Maybe it would be helpful to see it.
But I read the entirety of that post, and precisely defining the self-indication assumption is correct. So because what was confusing me is that this, it always starts with, suppose that God flips a coin. If it comes up tails, 10 people get created. If it comes up heads, 1 person gets created. What odds should you give to the coin having come up heads? So I immediately go into my other argument, which you have already presented me with an answer, which I have to think about. It's remarkably interesting. It's an interesting answer, I think you've given. But you see, my problem here when I read this article is that you say, suppose God flips a coin, what odds should we give to the coin having come up heads? But if the randomization procedure for the coin is a Dirac delta, and the experimenters in the Sleeping Beauty problem tell us this, then what you were saying before is correct, and you correctly said, well, we shouldn't update our priors at all, and it just remains one.
Well, sir. Well, there's a sense in which you the reason you don't update is that even if you did update, the theory wouldn't get any more likely, because if a theory with a probability of 0 gets elevated in probability by a factor of 10, it remains at 0, right? So it doesn't matter how much you update. If you technically apply Bayes' theorem, then you would update from 0 to 0. You would update by a factor of 10 and go from 0 to 0. But so that's true if you end up being absolutely certain that the theory is false. But what SIA says, remember, is just that the theory goes up by a factor of n, where n is the number of persons that you might be on the theory. So if that's right, then if the theory says that there are n times, then if in any case where the theory starts out with a prior that's non-zero, then upon people, it'll update by a factor of infinity. But the reason I give a lot of cases involving coin flips is just it's easier to kind of work through the math if it's a case involving like clear, well-defined objective probabilities. But the same basic point, the same basic arguments and principles apply more broadly to other cases. And views other than SIA reject SIA's judgments about these cases, right? So all the views other than SIA think that if a coin gets flipped that creates 1 person of heads and 1,000 of tails, all of the other views say that you shouldn't think that tails is 1,000 times likelier than heads.
Yeah, although one objection that I was thinking about right now, and then I think I will thank you, and I will thank you a lot for your time, and then I'll let you answer, and then I can think about it more, is that is there a reason to think that God is going to employ a randomization procedure that is not a Dirac delta? Like, it seems to me like omnipotent, infinite being is not going to like play dice before deciding what universe he's going to make. It seems more likely to me that perhaps even by definition, this could be a problem for you, perhaps even by definition of God, that he would not engage in any stochastic process to create a universe. He would just create the universe he wanted to create, and that is modeled physically by using a Dirac delta. I'm just proceeding.
Right. Right. So Yes. So it's true that the way that God will choose to create will not be a way that's subject to chance. But the point is, you apply chance based on the subjective probabilities, given your ignorance of what God is like and what God is likely to do. Right? So you, based on your limited epistemic situation, you think there's some chance God will create infinite people, some chance he won't. And so then you get a big update in favor of theism, assuming theism predicts infinite people existing with higher likelihood than the other theory. Like, here's an analogy. Let's imagine so one of two things is going to happen. Either you're going to wake up once, or there's going to be some agent who decides how often you wake up. And you think maybe the agent is the kind of guy who would wake you up infinite times, but you're not sure. Maybe he'd only wake you up one time. Maybe he wouldn't wake you up at all, but maybe he'd wake you up infinite times. Well, upon waking up, just by the Sleeping Beauty logic, like, suppose you start out with a prior of 0.1 that he'd wake you up infinite times. Upon waking up, now you should be certain that he woke you up infinite times by the Sleeping Beauty logic. And so the idea is, if we treat God similarly, where we say, okay, we're not exactly sure what he would do. There's some probability that he would make infinite people. And this isn't like objective probability. It's not like he's playing dice. This is subjective probability based on just how likely we think he is to do different things. Then you'll get a big update in favor of things where he creates a lot of people by logic analogous to the logic in the Sleeping Beauty problem.
Okay, no, but now I'm a bit confused because you said that by definition, God is not going to randomly choose a universe, but we should have subjective probabilities that he might create one universe or another.
Right. So the way that you treat your subjective probabilities, if you're unsure, if there's some process that only turns out one result, but you're not sure what that one result is, then you just treat it as if it were a random process with regards to your subjective reasoning, right? So if not if by definition this entity called God is not going to engage in a stochastic No, you do even if the entity.
I would agree.
So like go back to the analogy, right? Think about the agent who, imagine this agent is not going to employ a stochastic process, right? You don't know everything about the agent. The agent is somewhat mysterious. The agent might wake you up infinitely, or they might wake you up a finite number of times, or they might wake you up no times. But whatever they do, they're not going to employ a stochastic process. So let's say you say, okay, I don't know which of these is more likely, but you sort of reason, okay, 10% odds that he'll wake me up infinite times. Then after waking up, you should get an infinite update in favor of the theory that they woke you up infinite times, because that theory predicts more wake-ups. It predicts a higher probability of the present wake-up.
Okay, I see what you're saying, but I think this might run into. I think what you're saying. Let me try to steelman what you're saying. It's that okay, this entity does use Dirac deltas to choose how much time he's going to wake me, but I don't know which Dirac delta he's going to use, in the sense that I don't know how many times he's going to wake me up. So analogously, it would be, I don't know how many people he's going to create. I know he's not going to use any randomization fact, but I don't know the thing that has randomness is how many people he is going to create.
Right. And by the way, this is how we apply something like Bayesian reasoning to normal cases, where suppose we think a person may have committed a crime, and the evidence for it is, well, their blood was found all over the crime scene. This is a case like the OJ case. Their blood was found all over the crime scene, and their DNA was on the murder weapon, and so on. All this stuff. In this case, assume determinism's true. So what they did, what their choices they made was not a stochastic process. It wasn't a random process. Nonetheless, the point is, you start out with some prior that they did it, and then you just update based on your prior that they did it in favor of thinking that they probably did it based on all this evidence. And so even though it's not a stochastic process, because you're uncertain about the non-stochastic process, you get a big update in favor of thinking that they committed the murder, because that makes it likely that their blood would be found at the crime scene. In a similar way, by SIA's lights, your existence gives you evidence that there are more people. And so if you're uncertain about how many people God would create, well, you get a big update. You get a big update in favor of all the worldviews on which infinite people get created. More precisely, the biggest infinity worth of people get created. And
okay,
yeah.
I see what you're saying. I'll just say the last thing, and then I'll thank you, and we can chat, not live. Yeah, so it seems what you've said seems disanalogous to me, because O.J. Simpson is not an entity that by definition is. No, I don't know. I have to reason. I have to reason more on your arguments.
Right.
I'll just thank you. Yeah.
The thing you were saying about by definition, I'll just say. So imagine that there's some being, okay, and you're not sure what being was what being exists. It's either a being named murderer, which by definition carries out murders, or a being named angel, which by definition never carries out murders. If you find, and you don't know which of the beings it is, if you find this being's blood all over the crime scene, you get evidence that they carried out the murder. Because your uncertainty should lead you to think, okay, it's more likely that they're the murderer being than that they're the angel being. In a similar way, if you're uncertain about what God would create, even if he doesn't use a stochastic process, you get an update in favor of thinking that he created infinite people. And so insofar as you think that, and maybe the way the Anthropic argument works, by the way, I don't know if we've explained it, but the idea is just, from the fact that you exist on SAA, you should think there are infinite people. This doesn't just mean you should think there's some infinite worth of people. You should think there's the biggest infinity that there might be worth of people. And then the idea is SIA predicts the biggest infinity worth of people with higher probability than theism predicts the biggest infinity worth of people with higher probability than alternative views, because on theism, God would have a reason to create. So he'd do just this huge infinity worth of creating, at least with non-trivial probability. In contrast, if there is no God, maybe you'll get an infinite multiverse, but you definitely won't get a big infinite multiverse. None of the existing multiverse models get you an infinite that's the right size, and so yeah, you end up getting a small infinite. So that's the basic way the argument works. If you want more, check out my blog.
Yeah, I read the argument, and I was immediately had some questions on the first premise, but maybe I'll reevaluate them. When you debate with somebody, it seems to me that often I update my credences like 2 days after the debate. Because it's very hard, like during a debate, to understand if you're wrong or not. I think, like, this happens to me when I debate with people in real life. It usually takes me a couple of days, so I'll just have to reason on it a bit.
Yeah. Happy to talk more about this later.
Lovely.